Hello and welcome to The Essential Reads. My name is Isaac and my goal is to bring to you a bunch of classic audiobooks in an easy and accessible way. We are continuing with Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoyevsky, and this is part 2, chapter 7. Let's begin. In the middle of the street stood a barouche. A grand, elegant one, harnessed to a pair of fiery grey horses. There was no one in it, and its coachman had climbed down from the box and was standing alongside. He was holding the horses by the bridle. All around jostled a throng of people, with policemen at the front. One of the policemen was holding a lighted lantern which he was using in order to illuminate something that was lying in the roadway, right underneath the wheels. Everyone was talking, shouting, sighing. The coachman seemed to be in a state of bewilderment, and every so often he would say, "Lord, what a terrible sin!" Raskolnikov squeezed his way through as best as he could, and at last saw the object of all this fuss and curiosity. On the ground lay a man who had just been run down by the horses, unconscious by the look of it, very poorly dressed, but in respectable clothes, and covered in blood. Blood streamed from his face and head. His face was battered, torn, and mutilated. He had clearly been run down in earnest. "Sainted fathers!" the coachman was wailing. "What could I have done? If I had been going fast, or if I hadn't shouted to him. But I was driving slow and even. Everybody saw it. I'm only human. A drunk man doesn't stop to light a candle. It's a well-known fact. I saw him crossing the street. He was swaggering about, nearly falling down. I shouted once, I shouted again, and then a third time, and I reined the horses in. But he just fell straight under the hooves. I don't know whether he did it on purpose, or whether he was just very drunk. The horses, they're young ones, easily frightened. They jerked, and he screamed. And they jerked even worse. That's what the trouble was." "That's right, that's the way it happened," the voice of someone who had witnessed the accident called from the crowd. "And he did shout, it's true. He shouted 3 times. Another voice responded. "That's right, 3 times, we all heard him," called a third. The coachman was not, however, particularly downhearted or upset. It was plain that the carriage had a rich and important owner who was somewhere awaiting its arrival. The policemen were, of course, taking considerable pains to see that this did, in fact, take place. All that remained was for the man who had been run down to be taken to the police station, and from there to the hospital. No one knew his name. Meanwhile, Raskolnikov had managed to squeeze his way through, and he bent down even closer. Suddenly, the lantern brightly illuminated the face of the unfortunate man. Raskolnikov recognized him. "I know him! I know him!" he shouted, forcing his way right to the front. "He's a retired servant, a titular councillor. His name's Marmeladov. He lives in this part of town, just along there, in Kossel's tenements. Quick, send for a doctor. I'll pay. Look." He pulled the money out of his pocket and showed it to the policeman. He was in a state of violent excitement. The policemen were pleased that someone had recognized the victim of the accident. Raskolnikov told them his name too, gave them his address, and with all his might, as though it were his very own father who lay there, set about persuading them to carry the unconscious Marmeladov up to his lodgings. "He lives right there, just 3 buildings along," he said, pleading with them. "In Kostel's tenements, the place that belongs to that German, the one with all the money. This man must be drunk and was on his way home. I know him. He drinks. Along there he has a family, a wife and children. There's a daughter. We'll have to wait a long time before they can cart him off to the hospital, but there's bound to be a doctor in one of the apartment houses there. I'll pay. At least he'll get some private attention. Otherwise he'll die before he even gets to the hospital." He even went to the length of discreetly slipping something into the policeman's hand. But the whole thing was without snags and above board. And in any case, help was more readily available here. The injured man was lifted up and carried. Helpers had come forward. Kostel's tenements were situated some 30 yards away. Raskolnikov brought up the rear, carefully supporting the man's head and pointing out the way. In here! In here! We'll have to carry him up the stairs, head first. Turn him around. That's right. I'll pay for everything. I'll make it worth your while, he muttered. As always, whenever she had a spare moment, Katerina Ivanovna had lost no time in beginning to pace up and down her little room, from the window to the stove and back again, her arms firmly folded in front of her as she talked to herself and coughed. Recently, she had begun to hold even more frequent conversations with her elder daughter, the 10-year-old Polenka, who, although there was much that she did not yet understand, was nonetheless well aware that her mother needed her, and for this reason always followed her with her large, intelligent eyes, and did her utmost to appear all-comprehending. On this occasion, Polya was undressing her little brother, who had been unwell all day, in order to put him to bed. As he waited while she removed his shirt, which was to be washed overnight, the boy sat on the chair in silence, his expression serious, direct and unmoving, his little legs extended forward, pressed tight together, the heels of his unstockinged feet held up to his audience, and the toes turned outwards. He was listening to what his mother and sister were saying, his lips blown out, his eyes opened wide, without moving, in exactly the way that all intelligent young boys sit while they are being undressed in order to go to bed. A little girl, even younger and smaller than he, in utter rags, stood behind the screen, awaiting her turn. The door to the staircase was open, in order to afford at least some relief from the waves of tobacco smoke that were escaping from the other rooms, and which every now and again made the poor consumptive woman cough long and agonizingly. During this last week, Katerina Ivanovna seemed to have grown even thinner, and the red spots on her cheeks burned even more vividly than before. You would never believe, you would never imagine, Polenka, she was saying as she paced about the room, what a splendid, cheerful life we led in the house of my papa. And how this drunken man has ruined me, and will ruin you all. My papa was a civil service colonel, and very nearly a governor. He only had one more step to climb up the ladder, and everybody used to come from miles around to see him, and they'd say, we all consider you our governor, Ivan Mikhailovich. When I... Oh, curse this existence! She screamed, coughing up phlegm and clutching her chest. When Princess Bezemelnaya saw me at the Herschel's last ball, she gave me her blessing. When I married your father, Polya, she asked me once, are you not the charming young lady who danced with the shawl at the graduation ball? That tear must be mended. You'd better get a needle and sew it up at once, the way I taught you. Well, tomorrow... tomorrow... it'll get even bigger, she shouted, overstraining herself. Then there was Prince Shechegolskoy, a gentleman of the royal bedchamber, who had just arrived from St. Petersburg. He danced the mazurka with me, and declared his intention of coming to me the following day with the proposal of marriage. But I thanked him in flattering language and told him that my heart belonged to another, and had done so for a long time. That was your father, Polya. Papa was horribly angry. Is the water ready? Right. Hand me that shirt. And what about his socks? Lida? She said, turning to the little younger daughter. You'll have to sleep as you are tonight, without your chemise. Yes? You'll manage. And lay your socks out beside it. I'll wash the whole lot together. And what's keeping that drunken vagabond? He's worn his shirt out like some floor cloth. It's full of holes. I want to do the whole lot together. So as not to have this torture 2 nights running. Good God. What's this? She screamed, taking a glance at the crowd in the passage, and at the men who were squeezing their way through with some sort of burden into her room. What's this? What are they carrying? For the love of God! Where do you want him? The policeman asked, taking a look round now that the blood-covered, senseless figure of Marmeladov had been hauled into the room. On the sofa. Put him right there on the sofa, with his head pointing this way, Raskolnikov said, showing him. He was run down in the street, drunk, someone shouted from the passage. Katerina Ivanovna stood utterly pale, her breath coming with difficulty. The children were frightened. Little Lida gave a scream, rushed over to Polya, threw her arms around her, and began to tremble all over. Having found Marmeladov a place to lie, Raskolnikov rushed over to Katerina Ivanovna. "For heaven's sake, calm down. Don't be so frightened," he said in a fast patter. "He was crossing the street. A barouche ran him down. Don't worry, he'll come round. I told them to bring him here. I came to see you. Don't you remember? He'll come round. I'll pay for everything." "He got what he wanted!" Katerina Ivanovna screamed in despair and rushed over to her husband. Raskolnikov quickly perceived that this woman was not one of those who collapse in a faint on the slightest pretext. In a flash, a pillow appeared beneath the head of the unfortunate man, something no one had thought of until now. Katerina Ivanovna began to undress him, examine him, and fuss over him without losing her nerve, as she had forgotten about herself, was biting her trembling lips and suppressing the screams that were ready to burst from her bosom. Meanwhile, Raskolnikov had managed to persuade someone to go and get a doctor. It turned out that a doctor lived in the next building, but one. "I've sent someone to fetch a doctor," he kept saying to Katerina Ivanovna again and again. "Don't worry, I'll pay for everything. Have you some water? Bring me a napkin or a towel or something, quickly. We don't know yet how badly hurt he is. He's been injured, but he's not dead. You may be assured of that. The doctor will give us his opinion." Katerina Ivanovna rushed over to the window. There, on a broken chair in a corner, stood a large earthenware basin containing the water for the nocturnal washing of her children's and husband's clothes. This nocturnal laundering was performed by Katerina Ivanovna herself, with her own hands at least twice a week, and sometimes even more often, for they had reached the point where there were almost no relief items of linen left, and each member of the family possessed only one copy of anything. But Katerina Ivanovna could not abide uncleanliness, and, sooner than tolerate the presence of dirt in her home, preferred to submit herself to this exhausting labor, which was beyond her strength, at night when everyone was asleep, so that the wet things would have time to dry on the indoor clothesline, and so that when the morning came, she would be able to present her family with clean linen. She seized hold of the basin in order to bring it over as Raskolnikov had requested, but almost fell to the floor under the burden. By now, however, Raskolnikov had managed to find a towel. He soaked it in the water, and with it began to wash Marmeladov's bloodied face. Katerina Ivanovna stood beside him, drawing her breath painfully and holding her hands to his chest. She was herself in need of medical attention. Raskolnikov began to realize that he might have done the wrong thing in having persuaded the police to allow the injured man to be brought here. The policeman was also looking somewhat at a loss. "Polya!" Katerina Ivanovna shouted. "Run and get Sonya, quickly! If you don't find her in, it doesn't matter. Just tell them that her father's been run down by the horses, and that she's to come here as soon as she gets back. Quickly, Polya! Here, cover yourself with that shawl." "Run like Billy-o!" the boy in the chair cried suddenly, and having said this, immersed himself once more in his earlier silent, upright position, his eyes protruding, his heels stuck forward, and his toes turned out. Meanwhile, the room had become so full of people that there was hardly any room to move an elbow. The policemen had all gone, apart from one, who remained for a time, and tried to drive the audience that had come gathering in from the staircase back down the stairs again. These spectators were, however, replaced by very nearly all the lodgers in Mrs. Lipoveshal's apartments, who came pouring through from the inner rooms, at first merely jostling together in the doorway, but then trooping in their cohorts into the room itself. Katerina Ivanovna was in a frenzy. "You might at least let him die in peace!" she shouted at the multitude. "Come to watch the performance, with cigarettes in your mouths. That's right, come with your hats on, I don't mind. Yes, there's one wearing his hat. Get out of here. At least show some respect for a dead man." She choked with coughing, but her remonstrances had had the desired effect. It was clear that the lodgers were even somewhat afraid of Katerina Ivanovna. One by one they squeezed their way back to the door with that strange sense of inner satisfaction that may, unfailingly, be observed even in those closest to one another, in the event of some sudden misfortune affecting one of their number, and to which, without exception, not a single person is immune, no matter how sincere his or her feelings of compassion and concern may be. Now, moreover, voices could be heard outside the door with talk of hospital, and how they ought not to bother these people unnecessarily. Men oughtn't to die unnecessarily, you mean? Shouted Katerina Ivanovna as she rushed to open the door in order to release upon them the full fury of her wrath. In the doorway, however, she collided with none other than Mrs. Lippesvessel herself, who had only just been informed of the accident and had come running to establish order. She was an extremely silly and quarrelsome German woman. "Ah, my God!" she cried, raising her hands in horror. "Your husband has been trampled drunk by a horse. To the hospital with him. I'm the landlady round here. Amalia Ludvigovna, I must ask you to mind your manners." Katerina Ivanovna began haughtily. She always adopted a haughty tone when speaking to the landlady, in order to make her remember her place, and was unable, even now, to deny herself this satisfaction. "Amalia Ludvigovna, I have told you once and for all that you must never dare to call me Amelia Ludvigovna. My name is Amalia Ivanovna." "No, it is not. It's Amelia Ludvigovna. And since I am not one of those base flatterers of yours, unlike Mr. Lebezhatnikov, who is laughing outside the door at this very moment—" There was indeed a sound of laughter outside the door, and a cry of, "They're fighting." "I shall go on calling you Amalia Ludvigovna, though I truly cannot understand why you dislike that name. You can see for yourself what has happened to Semyon Zakharovich. He's dying. I must now ask you to bolt the door and not let anyone in. At least let him die in peace. If you do not, I wish to make it clear that your behavior will be reported tomorrow to the Governor General himself. The prince knew me before I was married, and has a very clear memory of Semyon Zakharovich, to whom, on many occasions, he was a benefactor. Everyone knows that Semyon Zakharovich had many friends and patrons, whom he himself relinquished out of decent pride, aware of his unhappy weakness. But now—" She pointed to Raskolnikov, he being helped by a certain magnanimous young man who was possessed of means and connections, and whom Semyon Zakharovich knew as a boy. "And I may assure you, Amalia Ludvigovna—" All of this was delivered in an extremely fast patter that grew even faster as it continued. Suddenly, however, Katerina Ivanovna's eloquence was abruptly cut short by her coughing. At that moment, the dying man recovered consciousness and gave a groan, and she ran over to him. He opened his eyes, and, still unable to recognize anyone or take in anything, began to peer at Raskolnikov, who was standing over him. The injured man was breathing heavily, deeply, and at long intervals. Blood was seeping from the corners of his mouth. A sweat had broken out on his forehead. Not recognizing Raskolnikov, he began to stare uneasily about him. Katerina Ivanovna was looking at him with a gaze that was sad but stern, and tears streamed from her eyes. "My God! The whole of his chest has been trampled in! The blood!" she said in desperation. "We must take all of his upper garments. Turn round a bit if you can, Semyon Zakharovich!" she shouted at him. Marmeladov recognized her. "A priest," he said in a hoarse voice. Katerina Ivanovna walked over to the window, leant her forehead against the window frame, and in despair exclaimed, "Oh, curse this existence!" "A priest," the dying man said again, after a moment's silence. "They've go 1-for-1!" Katerina Ivanovna shouted at him. In obedience to her cry, he fell silent. With a timid, melancholy gaze, his eyes searched for her again. Again she came back to him, and stood by the head of the sofa. He grew slightly calmer, but not for long. Soon his gaze came to rest on the little leader, his favorite among the children, who was trembling in a corner, as though in a fit, staring fixedly at him with her astonished child's eyes. "But," he said, pointing at the child with concern. He was trying to say something. "What is it now?" screamed Katerina Ivanovna. "There's nothing on her feet. Nothing on her feet," he muttered, indicating the little girl's bare feet with a wild look. "Be quiet!" Katerina Ivanovna cried irritably. "You know very well why there's nothing on her feet." "Thank God, the doctor!" Raskolnikov exclaimed in relief. The doctor came in, a punctilious little old man. a German, looking about him with an air of suspicion. He went over to the patient, took his pulse, carefully felt his head, and with Katerina Ivanovna's help, unbuttoned his utterly blood-soaked shirt, exposing his chest. The whole of the chest was utterly mutilated, crushed, and battered out of shape. Several ribs on the right-hand side were broken. On the left-hand side, right on the place of the heart, there was a large, ominous, yellowish-black bruise. A savage kick mark made by a hoof. The doctor frowned. The policeman told him that the patient had been caught in the wheel and dragged along, turning round with it for some 30 yards along the roadway. "It's amazing he's come round at all," the doctor whispered to Raskolnikov quietly. "What do you think?" Raskolnikov asked. "He's going to die at any moment." "Is there really no hope?" "Not in the slightest. He's at his last gasp. What's more, he has very bad head injuries. If you like, I can let some blood, but that won't do any good. In 5 or 10 minutes, he'll most certainly be dead. Do it all the same, if you like, but I warn you, it will be quite useless." At that moment, there was the sound of more footsteps. The crowd in the passage made way, and a priest, a little grey-haired old man, appeared on the threshold bearing holy gifts. The policeman had gone to get him while they had still all been down on the street. The doctor at once ceded his place with him, and they exchanged meaningful glances. Raskolnikov prevailed upon the doctor to wait just a little longer before going. The doctor shrugged his shoulders and remained. Everyone drew away. The confession lasted only a very short time. It was doubtful whether the dying man had took in much what was said. He could only articulate jagged, unclear sounds. Katerina Ivanovna picked up little Lida, took the boy down from the chair, and, moving away into the corner where the stove was, got down on her knees and made the children kneel in front of her. The little girl could do nothing but tremble, but the boy, poised on his bare little knees, kept raising his hand with a rhythmical motion, crossing himself at all 4 points of the cross, and bowing down to the floor, knocking his forehead against it. Something it was evident he particularly enjoyed doing. Katerina Ivanovna was biting her lips and holding back her tears. She was also praying, from time to time straightening the boy's shirt, and managing to throw over the 2 exposed shoulders of the little girl a triangular headscarf, which she took from her chest of drawers while still continuing to kneel and pray. Meanwhile, the door that led from the inner rooms began to be opened once more by the inquisitive crowd. In the passage, an ever denser throng of spectators, residents from the whole staircase, was gathering. None of them, however, stepped over the threshold. A little candle end illuminated the entire spectacle. From that moment, in through the crowd from the passage, rushed Polenka, who had to run to get her sister. She came in, hardly able to draw her breath from having run so fast, took off the shawl, sent a searching gaze round in quest of her mother, went over to her, and said, "She's coming. I met her in the street." Her mother pushed her down into a kneeling position, and stationed her next to her. Timidly and silently, squeezing her way through, a girl emerged from the crowd. And strange was her sudden appearance in that room amidst poverty, rags, death, and despair. She was also in rags. Her clothes were of the cheapest, but tarted up in the manner of the streets, in accordance with tastes and conventions that have developed in a particular world of their own, with a gaudy and shameful purpose that is all too obvious. Sonya stopped out in the passage right on the threshold, but did not cross it, and peered in like one who is embarrassed, seemingly unaware of everything, oblivious to the fact that she was wearing her coloured silk dress, bought at fourth hand, and quite out of place here, with its ridiculous long train and vast, bulging crinoline that took up practically the whole doorway. Her light-coloured boots, her parasol, superfluous at night, but which she had brought with her all the same, and her absurd, round straw hat with its bright orange feather. From under the tilted hat there peeped a thin, pale, and frightened little face, with an open mouth and eyes that were motionless with horror. Sonya was small of stature, about 18 years old, a thin but rather good-looking blonde with wonderful blue eyes. She was staring fixedly at the bed, at the priest. She too was out of breath from having walked so fast. At last, the whispering, some of the things being said by the people in the crowd, must have reached her attention, for she lowered her gaze, took a step over the threshold, and stood in the room, though still only right by the doorway. Confession and communion were over. Katerina Ivanovna again went over to her husband's bed. The priest withdrew, and, as he left, began to say a few parting words of consolation to her. "And what am I supposed to do with these?" she said, interrupting him sharply and irritably, pointing at her urchins. "God is merciful. Trust in the help of the Almighty," the priest began. "Oh, go away! Merciful he may be, but not to us he isn't." "It is a sin to say such things, dear lady," the priest said, shaking his head. "And what about that? Isn't that a sin?" Katerina Ivanovna shouted, pointing to the dying man. "It may be that those who are the involuntary cause of it will agree to compensate you, if only in the manner of lost income." "Oh, you don't know what I'm talking about!" Katerina Ivanovna cried irritably, with a wave of her arm. "Anyway, why would they compensate me? I mean, it was him. He was drunk. He walked under those horses himself. What income? He never brought any income, just lots of trouble. He's a drunkard, you know. He's drunk everything he owned. He stole our things and took them to that drinking house. Used up their lives and my own in that place, he did. Thank God he's dying. We'll be a bit better off." "One must forgive at the hour of death. It's a sin to talk that way, dear lady. Such sentiments are a grievous sin." Katerina Ivanovna had been bustling round the dying man, giving him water, wiping the sweat and blood from his head, straightening his pillows, and passing the odd comment to the priest now and then, turning to him each time as she did so in the midst of her labours. Now, however, she suddenly rushed at him, almost in a frenzy. "All that's just words, and nothing but words. Forgive me. Look. If he hadn't been run over today, he'd have come home drunk as usual, still wearing that one and only shirt of his, all worn to threads and in tatters. He'd have stumbled into bed and slept like a pig, and I'd have to swill around the water until daybreak, washing his rags, and the children's, and then hang them outside to dry in the window, and then as soon as daybreak came, sit mending them. And there'd be my night gone. So what's the point in talking about forgiveness? I've done enough forgiving already." A terrible, deep-seated cough brought her words to a halt. She spat into her handkerchief, and demonstratively shoved it under the priest's eyes, with her hand clutching her bosom in pain. The handkerchief was covered in blood. The priest lowered his head and said nothing. Marmeladov was in his final death agony. His eyes were fixed on the face of Katerina Ivanovna, who was now leaning over him again. There was still something he wanted to say to her, and indeed he began to speak, moving his tongue with difficulty and getting the words out unclearly. But Katerina Ivanovna, realizing that he was trying to beg her forgiveness, at once shouted at him in a commanding tone. "Be quiet! I don't want to hear it! I know what you're trying to say!" And the injured man fell silent. At that same moment, however, his wandering gaze alighted on the doorway, and he saw Sonya. Until now, he had not noticed her. She was standing in the corner, in the shadow. "Who's this?" he suddenly articulated in a hoarse, gasping voice that was filled with consternation, motioning in horror with his eyes towards the doorway where his daughter stood, and making an effort to sit up. "Lie down! Lie down!" Katerina Ivanovna began to shout. But with a superhuman effort, he managed to support himself on one arm. Wildly and fixedly, he stared for a time at his daughter, as though he did not know who she was. And indeed, this was the first time he had ever seen her dressed in clothes like these. Suddenly he recognized her, humiliated, in total despair, dressed up to the nines, and covered in shame and embarrassment, meekly awaiting her turn to say farewell to her dying father. Infinite suffering showed itself in her features.
Sonya, daughter, forgive me,
He cried, and made to reach out his hands to her, but losing his support, came crashing down from the sofa, face to the floor. They rushed to lift him up, put him back. But he was already breathing his last. Sonya uttered a faint scream, ran over to him, embraced him, and froze hard in that embrace. He died in her arms.
got what he wanted.
Katerina Ivanovna cried at the sight of her husband's dead body.
Well, what am I going to do now? Where am I going to get the money to bury him? And what about them? What am I going to feed them on tomorrow?
Raskolnikov went up to Katerina Ivanovna.
Katerina Ivanovna, he said to her, last week your deceased husband told me all about your life and its attendant circumstances. Please let me assure you that he spoke of you with rapturous esteem. From the very evening on which I learned how devoted he was to you all, and what especial love and respect he nurtured towards you, Katerina Ivanovna, in spite of his unfortunate weakness. From that evening we became friends. Permit me now to effect the repayment of my debt to my deceased friend. Look, here are 20 rubles, I think. If they will be of any assistance to you, then in short, I shall be back again. I shall most certainly be back. I may even be back tomorrow. Goodbye.
And he quickly walked out of the room, hurriedly squeezing his way through the crowd onto the staircase. In the melee, however, he suddenly collided with Nicodim Fomitch, who had heard of the accident and wished to take a personal hand in dealing with the situation. They had not seen each other since the time of the scene in the bureau, but Nicodim Fomitch recognized him instantly.
Ah, what are you doing here?
He inquired.
He's dead, Raskolnikov answered. The doctor was here. The priest has been. Everything's in order. Please don't go bothering the destitute wife. She's got consumption as it is. Try to give her some courage if you can. I mean, you're a good man. I know you are.
He added with an ironic smile, looking him straight in one eye.
I say, you're fairly covered in blood, aren't you?
Nicodim Fomitch commented, having discerned by the light of his lantern several fresh bloodstains on Raskolnikov's waistcoat.
Yes, I am. I'm covered in blood all over,
Raskolnikov said with a peculiar look, then smiled, gave a nod of his head, and walked off down the staircase. He made his descent slowly, not hurrying, in a state of total fever, and, without being aware of it, charged with a certain new and boundless sensation of full and powerful life that had suddenly swept in upon him. This sensation might be compared to that experienced by a man who has been sentenced to death and is suddenly and unexpectedly told he has been reprieved. Halfway down, he was overtaken by the priest, who was on his way home. Raskolnikov silently let him pass, exchanging a wordless bow with him. As he was treading the last few steps, however, he suddenly heard some hurried footsteps behind him. Someone was trying to catch him up. It was Polenka. She was running after him, calling,
"Listen, listen!"
He turned round to face her. She ran down the last flight of steps and stopped right in front of him, one step above. A dim light was filtering in from the courtyard. Raskolnikov could make out the thin but pleasant face of the little girl, who was smiling to him and looking at him in a lively, childish way. She had been sent to him with a message, something which she was evidently very pleased about.
Listen, what is your name? What's your name? And also, where do you live?
She asked in a hurried tone, a little out of breath. He put both his hands on her shoulders and looked at her with a kind of happiness. He took such a pleasure in looking at her. He himself did not know why.
Who sent you? My sister, Sonya,
the little girl replied, her smile even livelier now.
I somehow knew it was your sister, Sonya. Mother sent me too. When my sister started sending me, mother came over too and said, "Run as fast as you can, Polya."
Do you love your sister, Sonya?
I love her more than anyone else,
Polenka said with a peculiar firmness, and her smile suddenly became more serious. And will you love me too? In lieu of a reply, he saw the little girl's face with its pouting lips naively extend in order to give him a kiss. Suddenly, her matchstick-thin arms seized him in the tightest of embraces, her head inclined towards his shoulder, and the little girl began quietly to weep, pressing her face harder and harder against him.
"I want my papa,"
she said a moment later, raising that face, now stained with tears, which she wiped away with her hand.
"We've had such a lot of bad luck recently,"
she added unexpectedly, with that peculiar air of solid strength children adopt with such intensity whenever they suddenly try to talk like grown-ups. And did your papa love you?
"All of us. Of all of us, he loved little Chenka the best,"
she went on very earnestly, without smiling, this time speaking exactly in the way grown-ups do.
"He loved her because she's little, and also because she is ill. He was always bringing her sweets. And for us, he taught us to read, taught me grammar and Holy Scripture,"
she added with dignity.
"And Mamma never said anything, but we knew that she liked it, and Papa knew it too. And Mamma wants to teach me French, because it's time I was getting some education."
And do you know your prayers?
"Oh, goodness, of course we do. We've known them for ages. I say my prayers to myself, because I'm big now, but Kolya and little Cheka say theirs out loud with Mamma. First they recite, 'Mother o' God.' Then they say another prayer that goes, 'O Lord, forgive and bless our sister Sonya.' And then another one that goes, 'O Lord, forgive and bless our other papa.' Because our old papa is dead now. And this is our other one, you see? But we say prayer for our old one too."
Polechka, my name is Rodion. Please say a prayer for me too sometime. And thy servant Rodion. That'll do.
"I'll pray for you all the rest of my life,"
the little girl said passionately, and again she suddenly laughed, rushed to him, and embraced him tightly. Raskolnikov told her his name, gave her his address, and promised to come and see them the next day without fail. The little girl went back upstairs completely enraptured by him. It was already getting on for 11 by the time he emerged on the street. 5 minutes later, he was standing on the bridge, at the very spot where the woman had thrown herself over the day before. "That's enough," he said solemnly and decisively. "Begone, mirages. Begone, affected terrors. Begone, apparitions. There's a life to be lived. I was alive just now, after all, wasn't I? My life didn't die along with the old woman. May she attain the heavenly kingdom. Enough, old lady. It's time you retired. Now is the kingdom of reason and light, and freedom and strength. And now we shall see. Now we shall measure swords," he added, self-conceitedly, as though addressing some dark power and challenging it. "And there was I, consenting to live in one arshin of space. I am very weak at the moment, but I think my illness has finally passed. I knew it would when I left my apartment earlier today. Come to think of it, Pochinkov tenements, that's just a couple of steps from here. Oh, I must go to Razumikhin's place. I'd have to go there even if it wasn't so close. Let him win his wager. Even let him make fun of me if he wants to. It doesn't matter. Let him. Strength. Strength is what I need. One can't get anything without strength. And strength has to be acquired by means of strength. That's what they don't understand," he added with pride and self-assurance, and continued his way across to the other side of the bridge, hardly able to shift his legs. His pride and self-assurance were increasing with every moment that passed. From one moment to the next, he was not the same person. But what had happened that was so special, that had caused this transformation in him? He himself did not know. Like a man clutching at a straw, he'd suddenly conceived the notion that for him, too, life was possible. That there was still life to be lived. That his life hadn't died along with the old woman. That was, perhaps, a hasty inference to draw, but he spent no time thinking about it. I asked her to say a prayer for thy servant Rodion, didn't I? The thought flashed suddenly through his head. Oh, well, that was just in case, he added, and immediately laughed at his childish behavior. He was in a most marvelous frame of mind. He did not have much difficulty in finding Razumichin. The new tenant was already familiar at the Ponchinkov building, and the yard-keeper was able to show him the way at once. Even halfway up the stairs, one could hear the noise and animated conversation of a large gathering. The door of the apartment was wide open. Shouting and arguments could be heard. Razumichin's room was quite a large one, and some 15 people were gathered in it. Raskolnikov stopped in the entrance hall. There, behind a partition, 2 of the landlord's serving maids were fussing over 2 large samovars, over bottles and plates and dishes holding pies and zakuski, all of which had been brought up from the landlord's kitchen. Raskolnikov sent one of them to tell Razumichin he was there. Razumichin came running in delight. At first glance, one could tell he had had rather a lot to drink, and although Razumichin almost never got drunk, on this occasion his condition was somewhat noticeable. Listen, Raskolnikov said hurriedly. I just came to tell you that you've won your wager, and that it really is true that no one can tell what may happen to him. I can't come in and join you. I'm so weak that I just fall down. So greetings and farewell. But come and see me tomorrow. You know what? I'm going to take you home. I mean, if you yourself are complaining of being weak, then... But what of your guests? I say, who's that curly-haired chap who was looking this way just now? Him? God only knows. Or he must be some friend of my uncle's. Or perhaps he just walked in. I'll leave Uncle with them. He's a most valuable fellow. It's a pity I can't introduce you to him now. But the hell with them all. They're not interested in me just now, and I need some fresh air. So you've come at the right time, brother. To be quite honest, another 2 minutes in there, I'd have started a fight with someone. They're talking such a load of rubbish. You can't imagine the crazy things people would say. Though, actually, perhaps you can. Don't we say a lot of silly things ourselves? Well, let them talk nonsense. Perhaps then they will talk sense later. Look, sit here for a minute while I go and get Zosimov. Zosimov pounced on Raskolnikov with something approaching greed. One could observe him in a peculiar kind of inquisitiveness. Soon his face brightened up. You must go to bed at once and sleep, he pronounced, having examined the patient as well as he could under the circumstances, and take a certain little something for the night. Will you take one? I prepared it earlier on. It's a type of powder. I'll take 2 if you like, Raskolnikov answered. The powder was taken then and there. It's a very good idea for you to take him home, Zosimov commented to Razumichin. We'll see how he is tomorrow, but today, at any rate, he doesn't seem too bad at all. A remarkable change from earlier on. One lives and learns. Do you know what Zosimov whispered to me just now as we were on our way out? Razumichin let drop as soon as they were out in the street. I may as well tell you straight, because they're such idiots. Zosimov said I was to talk to you a lot on the way, and get you to talk a lot, too, and then tell him what you'd said, because he's got an idea that you're insane, or something like that. Can you imagine? For one thing, you're 3 times cleverer than he is. For another, if you're not insane, you shouldn't give a damn that he's got such rubbish in his head. And for yet another, that lump of brawn, who's a surgeon by training, has now got a craze about mental illness. And what convinced him in your case was the conversation you had with Zamyatov earlier on today. Has Zamyatov told you everything? Yes. And just as well as he did, too. I've got all the ins and outs of it now, and so has Zamyatov. Well, you see, Roger, to put it bluntly, the fact is I'm a bit drunk now, but it doesn't matter. The fact is that this idea, you know what I'm talking about, really has popped up in their brains. Do you know what I mean?
That's to say, they didn't dare to say it aloud because it's the most absurd rubbish, especially since the arrest of that house painter. The whole thing just burst and vanished forever. Oh, why are they such idiots? Actually, at that point, I gave Zemyatov a bit of a dusting. That's between ourselves, brother. Please don't give the slightest hint that you know anything about it. I've noticed he's a bit sensitive about things like that. It happened at Levisa's place. But today, all has become clear. It's all that Ilya Petrovich fellow's fault. He took advantage of your fainting fit at the bureau, and he himself was ashamed afterwards. I know he was.
Raskolnikov listened avidly. Raskolnikov was drunkenly babbling. I passed out at that time because it was so stuffy and there was a smell of oil paint, Raskolnikov said.
There's another explaining factor. It wasn't just the paint either. That your fever of yours had been coming on for a whole month. Zosimov testifies to it. And as for that overzealous greenhorn, he's really had the wind taken out of his sails. You simply can't imagine. I'm not worth that man's little finger, he says. Yours, he means. He's sometimes capable of having good feelings about her. But the lesson he got today at the Crystal Palace, that beat everything. I mean, you really frightened the daylight out of him at first. Nearly gave the poor chap a fit. You actually made him half believe all that outrageous nonsense, and then suddenly stuck your tongue out at him as if to say, there, what do you make of that? Perfect. Now he's shattered, destroyed. By your master, I do declare. That's the way to handle them. Oh, how I wish I'd been there. He was dying to meet you just now. Porfiri wants to get to know you too. Ah, him too now? And why have they decided I'm insane? No, not really insane. I think I've been saying too many things to you, brother. You see, what struck him was that you only seem to be interested in that one point. Now it's clear why you found it interesting, knowing all the circumstances. And how that irritated you then, and got mixed up with your illness. I'm a bit drunk, brother. It's just that, heaven only knows why, he's got some idea of his own about it. I tell you, he's got a craze about mental illness. But if I were you, I wouldn't give a damn.
For some 30 seconds, neither of them said anything.
Listen, Raskolnikov,
Raskolnikov said.
I want to tell you this straight. I've just been at the home of a man who died. He was a civil servant. I gave all my money away there. And what's more, I've just been kissed by a certain creature who, even if I'd killed someone, would still have. And, to be brief, when I was there, I saw yet another creature, with a bright orange feather. But actually, I'm talking a lot of nonsense. I'm very weak. Please help me stay upright. I mean, we'll soon be at the staircase. What's the matter with you? What is it?
Raskolnikov asked with alarm.
My head's going around a bit, but that's not what it is. I feel so sad. Like a woman, really. Look, what's that? Look! What on earth? Don't you see? There's a light in my room. Look through the gap in the door.
Now they stood facing that last flight of stairs, beside the landlady's door. And it really was true. From down there, it was plainly evident that there was a light in Raskolnikov's room.
It's strange. Perhaps it's Nastasia,
Raskolnikov observed.
She never comes up to my room at this time of night. And anyway, she'll have gone to bed long ago. But it's all the same to me. Goodbye. Don't be silly, we're going in there together. I'm seeing you home, remember? I know we're going in together, but I want to say goodbye out here. But give me your hand. Goodbye. What's the matter with you, Roger? Nothing. Come on up, then. You can be a witness.
They began to climb the flight of stairs, and for a moment Raskolnikov had a fleeting suspicion that Zosimov might be right.
Damn, I've gone and upset him with my chatter,
he muttered to himself. Suddenly, as they approached the door, they heard voices from inside the room.
What's going on in there?
Raskolnikov exclaimed. Raskolnikov got to the door first and opened it wide. He stood on the threshold, transfixed. His mother and sister were sitting on the sofa, where they had been awaiting him for the past hour and a half. Why was it that they were the very last people he had expected to meet? The very last people who had been on his mind, in spite of the fact that even that day he had had repeated confirmation of the news that they'd left home, were on their way, would arrive any time now. During all that hour and a half, they had vied with each other in interrogating Nastasia, who even now was standing in front of them, having by this time managed to tell them the whole involved story. They had been out of their minds with fear on learning that he had run away today, not yet recovered from his illness, and, as was evident from the story, still in delirium. God, what's wrong with him? Both had wept, and both had endured the torments of the cross during those 1.5 hours of waiting. Raskolnikov's appearance was greeted by joyful, ecstatic cries. Both women rushed towards him. But he stood there like a corpse. A sudden and intolerable realization had struck him, like a thunderbolt. His arms would not even leave his sides in order to embrace them. They could not. His mother and sister were hugging him, kissing him, laughing, crying. He took one step, staggered, and collapsed on the floor in a dead faint. Consternation ensued, cries of horror, moans. Raskolnikov, who was standing in the doorway, came bounding into the room, seized Raskolnikov in his powerful arms, and in a flash, the sick man found himself on the sofa. "It's nothing, nothing!" Raskolnikov cried to Raskolnikov's mother and sister. "He's fainted, that's all. It's not serious. The doctor just said he's much better, that he's completely recovered. Bring some water. Look, he's coming around already. He's all right again now." And, grabbing Dunya's arm so hard that he very nearly wrenched it off, he forced her down in order to make her see that Raskolnikov was all right again now. Both mother and sister gazed at Raskolnikov as at some emanation of providence, with gratitude and tender emotion. They had already heard from Nastasia what had been done for their Roger during his illness, by this prompt young man. The expression that had been used about him that very evening in the course of her intimate conversation with Dunya, by Pulcheria Alexandrovna Raskolnikovna herself. Thank you so very much for listening. If you enjoyed, please like, comment, share, all that jazz, and if you really enjoyed, do subscribe, because there is more to come. It's a real long book, and we're not even halfway through. If you're listening on our podcast, please leave a review, as it helps get this in front of as many people as possible, and reading your reviews really makes my day. It is so bloody hot here. It's like 40 degrees outside, which means it's like 45 degrees inside, and this chapter took a hell of a long time to record, because I'm sweating buckets. I've had to order an air conditioning unit online, like one of those portable ones that you stick out the window just to try and take the edge off in my apartment. So it'll be arriving next week. And I hope that I don't die in the interim from heat stroke or dehydration. I don't know. It's going to be real intense this week. It is La Semaine de Canicule heat wave. And I've got to suffer through that. So if you want to support the show further, there's a Ko-Fi link on screen. Help me repay back what I owe on that on that air conditioning unit, or what I spend on that air conditioning unit. I don't get into debt. Don't want that. But anyway, once again, thank you very much for listening, and until next time, bye bye.